Hello, welcome to Code with Zach. Today we're going to be making a React Weather app. We're going to be using React Query and formik for our forms. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. It should be pretty simple. And without further ado, let's start the intro. Okay, so this is the weather application we're going to be building together. So if I type in a city name like LA, hit enter, I'm presented with the different days. So if I choose Friday, I can see what Friday's forecast is, which is today. And if I choose Saturday, I can see Saturday's forecasts. Sunday, same thing. And Monday, same thing. And if I choose a different city, let's say Mogadishu, hit enter. Oops, spell that wrong. Hit enter. I get to choose the days. Today's weather, tomorrow, Saturday, and Monday. I'm going to be taking you through how to build this and hope you enjoy the tutorial. Okay, so we're in the terminal now. We're going to create our new project. I'm just going to change directory into my desktop because that's where I want to create the weather application. So now that I'm in desktop, I'm going to paste in the command, which is npm create vite at latest. So once you've got that, hit enter. Project name, I'm going to call it weather app. Hit enter. I'm going to choose React, TypeScript, and there we are. We've got the new project created. Okay, now I've got the project opened up in VS Code, and let's get started. I'm going to first of all go to the terminal bit and then hit new terminal. And then as soon as our new terminal launches, we're just going to write down npm install to install all of the packages. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to want to do is just run our application. And then control or command click here, and you can see our Vite application is running. So right now, what we want to do is we want to remove all of this boilerplate. Remove that state as well. Go into the styles as well and remove all of this. Save that, and we're just going to create our first component. So I'm just going to create a components directory, and in here I'm going to create my first component. I'm going to call this weather form. Just going to write down RFC, hit tab, and then that should generate our weather form. If you're wondering what extension I'm using, it is this one, ES7 React Redux snippets. So once we've created the weather form, I'm just going to add in our form. A form element. And one other thing that we need to do as well is install formik. It's just going to help us with our form. Okay, now that we've got that, just going to add a label tag. And I'm just going to say this is for the city. And then have this as city name. Like that. And then we're going to add our input element. give that an ID of city, and then a name of city, and now I'm just going to add our use formik hook. So I'm just going to call this const formik, and I'm just going to use the use formik hook. And then what we want to pass into here so the first thing I'm going to pass into here, it will be our initial values, which will be city, which will be an empty string, and then add our onSubmit event handler, and that's going to give us values, and then from here we're just going to destructure the city from the values. And then I'm going to add our event that we're going to be passing up to, which is going to be on city, like that, and then I'm just going to give it a type, which is on city, city, it's going to return a void, and just give this a city type of string. And then once we do get the city, just going to pass it up to our parent component. And then that's that done. And then we just need to hook up our form to our use formik hook. So on change, I'm going to say formik dot handle change, and then value, we're going to say formik dot values, and then we're going to say city, and you can see the autocomplete that we get there. And then placeholder, just going to make that London dot as an example, and then just going to add our submit button, add it in this div, submit, and then we're just going to do this name get weather, and then that should be that. So React form. Oh, okay. I think I realised this needs to be a capital, and I need to change this to capital like that. Okay, and then that's that done. And then now we're just going to use our form hook within our app component. Add the import, and then you're just going to add a state as well for city. And then set city as well, and then use state, and the initial value is going to be empty string. Oh, actually we'll just make the initial value undefined, and then we'll get our onCity event, and then we're just going to handle that with our set city, and it's saying value city at incompatible. parameter value and set time converted to strings not assignable to our type undefined. Okay, so we're just going to initialize that with an empty string. So TypeScript is complaining there. And then just going to add a paragraph just to show that we are getting our city, and save. And then if I type in leads, hit enter, we get it for some reason as a query string. That's very weird. City. Oh, actually, I just realised we haven't hooked up to art and submit. I'm just going to say formik dot handle submit. Oops. And then just save. And then now if I type in leads, hit enter, our form's working just as we expect it to work. Okay, so for the OpenWeatherMap API, we're going to be using this 5-day, 3-hour forecast. So this is the API documentation. I'm not going to cover in this tutorial how to get the API key. For that, I'm just going to add a link in the description to another YouTube tutorial that will show you how to get the API key. In this one, we're just going to cover how to make calls and how to create the actual application. So, for this, for like 5-day 3-hour forecast data, what we need is the latitude and longitude from the documentation. And in order to get that, we use the geocode API. So if I go into a new tab and open a new tab, that's just how we get the geocodes. Like this is the endpoint for getting the geocodes. So as you can see from the documentation, we pass in the city name in a query string, and we can also pass in the state codes and country codes, but we're not going to do that. We're just going to pass in the city name. Okay, so before building anything, I always like to use Postman to see what the API response data structure will look like. So here in Postman, as you can see, I've pasted in the URL for getting the geocodes, and for the city, the query, I've added leads, and I've added the API key as well. So if I hit send, this is what the response looks like. We have the name, and then we have the locale names. However, the only bit that we're interested in this is like the longitude and the latitude. So in this other tab as well, I have the weather data API. So I'm just going to copy down the API key and add it to our query parameters, and we're going to copy in the longitude and the latitude as well, and just paste those in as well. So I'm just going to copy this latitude and paste it in the latitude bit here as well. I'm going to copy the longitude, I'm going to paste it here, and then when I hit send, we're going to see what the data looks like, what the data structure is. And one other thing I've added is all these metric units, because I'm from the UK and that's the units that we use. So if I just expand this, this is what the response data looks like. So we get the weather data, and as you see, we get like a description of the weather data. We also get the temperature, and we get the date as well. Now this isn't in a very good format, so later on we're going to just shape this data into a format that we can use better. But this is just a quick show of how the data structure looks like. I always like to use Postman first to see what the actual data looks like. Okay, now I'm just going to add some styling to our form to make it look a lot better. To do this, we're just going to be using Tailwind. So I'm just going to copy over the Tailwind installation. and then install it. And this is the Tailwind installation for Vite guide. I'm going to add this to the description as well. And once that's done, I'm just going to copy over the other init command. And as you can see, it's created a Tailwind config and a post.css config as well. Wow. And then inside of our Tailwind config, we're just going to add that. Let's find it first. And here are Tailwind config. Inside of the contents, I'm just going to copy this. And then inside of our main style as well, I'm just going to copy this as well, which should be our app.css. So I'm just going to get rid of all of this, default styling, and then save. And as you can see, I think the Tailwind styles have worked. I'm just going to test out by adding a background, BG red 900, hit save. Yeah, I don't think that's picked that up. Just restart the dev server again. Yep, our Tailwind styles are working. It just needed, I just need to restart the dev server. Okay, so now let's style our elements. So the first thing that we're going to want for our form is add a shadow, medium, then make the form rounded, then add a padding 6 around the form. That should be enough for the form. And then next I'm going to style the label element. So I'm just going to make that block text slate 700, text small, font bold, and text left to align to the left, and padding bottom 2, so there's a bit of space between the label and the input. So time to add some styling for the input now. Just going to give it a shadow, appearance none, border, make this round, give it a full width, and then give it a padding top and bottom of 2, padding left and right of 3, and then leaving tight. And then for our button, our submit button, I'm just going to add some a flex container to the div for the button. I'm just going to say this item center just to center it and justify between, and then I'm just going to save that. And as you can see, our form looks a lot better, although the button could also do some styling as well. So I'm just going to add a background PG blue 700 and a hover color of PG blue 600, slightly lighter color. Text white, and then the font bold, and the padding top and bottom 2, and the padding of left and right of 4, and then just make it rounded as well. Save that, and as you can see, this looks much better now. Okay, now that we've added our form, we're ready to make some API requests. So to make our API requests, we're going to be using React Query and Axios. So we're just going to be installing these packages. So I'm just going to copy this npm install. Over to the terminal, and then paste that in. And then next I'm just going to install Axios as well to make our API request. Okay, now that we've got that, let's go back. And in order to be able to use Axios, in order to be able to use React Query, we have to wrap our application in this query provider. So I'm just going to copy this. Go over to our main, and add it just above here. Then add the import. And we're just going to wrap our application around this query provider. Just going to hit Alt and then up arrow to drag that over. And then add that import, and then there we are. We should now have React Query to make our API requests. Next, we're going to add a API directory. So this directory will just be where our API requests live. So I'm just going to call this weather.ts, and then we're going to export a few API functions. So export const. The first one will be to get the coordinates. So get coordinates. And then this will be an async function, and it'll take in the parameter of city name, and then pass that in as a string. And then I'm going to declare a response, which is going to be an Axios GET request. Just going to use a template literal. Add in the import from Axios. And then I'm just going to get our API calls from Postman that we had. Paste that in, and we're going to remove the city name leads there, just replace it with our parameter so we can get that from our user input. And here as well, we're just going to replace this with our API key. So in order to do API keys in Vite, first we need to add a .env folder, so .env.local. I'm just going to create that in the root directory with where the package.json and the rest of the other things live. So I'm just going to call this API key, all capitals, API underscore key, and then just going to paste in my API key from there. And then save that. And now in order to get environment variables in Vite, it's a bit different. So just Just going to declare our API key here so we can use it in other places. So in Vite, in order to get API keys, you need to add an import statement, and then .meta, and then .env, and then .v API key, and then that should allow us to import API key. And one mistake I made is I should have prefixed that API key with the V as well. So let's just do that. V underscore, and then yep, and now we should be able to pass our API key in. Yep, and finally we need to return our response data. Data. I'm just going to add a optional chaining because we don't know if this request is going to be successful. Okay, now we've got our get coordinates. Next we're going to begin our get weather forecast. Export const get weather. Just going to leave as get weather just to shorten it down a bit, and then async. And then what we need to do is remember from the Postman example I showed you, we need to pass in our coordinates. I'm just going to pass them in as an object. So the first property in the object is going to be the longitude, and then the latitude is the next one, and that's of type number. And then just going to finish off our arrow function, and then I'm just going to do const response. And I'm just going to do something similar as we did to the last request. So I'm just going to do axios get and backslash, and then if we go back and copy over our API call, this is, yeah, I think that's going to be fine. And then we're just going to replace these actual values with whatever we get from our parameters. So I'm just going to say coordinates dot latitude, and same thing here. Dot longitude, and then our app ID, we're just going to replace that with our environment variable API key. And the reason why we don't want to hard code these here is because they won't be secure, and people can see, like if we push our Git repository up, people will see our API key and they could use it for other malicious reasons. That's why we have a .env folder, which will be automatically ignored by Git. And finally, we need to return our response. And that should be enough for this bit. Next, we're going to be using React Query in order to fetch our make our API calls. And the reason this is better than using use effect is that we don't get race conditions, and we get a lot of stuff out of the box, like our loading state, our error states, our data. So yeah. Okay, so now we're going to be making our actual API calls. We're going to be doing that in the app.tsx file. Just before we do that, just quickly, just going to add like a div around this weather form. And I'm going to give it a maximum width of large actually. Yep, that looks much better. So it's time for us to make our API calls. So first, we're going to be using our use query hook, which will give us back the data. So use query, and then I'm just going to pass out an object with a query key. So this will give us back the coordinates, so I'm just going to name this coordinates. And then add in the city name. And then we're going to have our query function. And we're just going to use that function that we declared earlier, which was get coordinates. And if you remember, it had a parameter of city, so we're just going to pass that in. And we're going to have enabled as well. So we don't want this to be firing off as soon as the app first loads. So this enabled will allow us to prevent that from happening by saying only fire this if we have a city. So we're just coalescing this city string value. So if it's empty string, it'll be false. But if it's a string with something inside it, this will evaluate to true, and therefore like stop firing. Okay. And now that we've got that, I'm just going to add in another state for our coordinates. So once we get our coordinates back, we can use the state to set it. So I'm just going to call this quad and set quad. Use state, and then I'm going to set it to an object, and our initial latitude will be 0, and our initial longitude will also be 0. And then I'm just going to add a success property to this, and this success property will let us know if we've been able to successfully get the coordinates for the city. So if you type in something, a city that doesn't exist, we don't want to take this any further, so that's why we have that. So next, I'm just going to add our use effect hook. And inside of our use effect hook, we're going to do if. So if we don't have a data dot length, I'm going to wrap that in optional chaining because we might not get it back. Return, and this is just to prevent the other code. This is like a guard condition. So const, so this will come back as an array, so we want to get the first item out of the array, so we'll just do some array destructuring. I'm just going to say data And then next we want to set our coordinate state. So we want to do latitude is going to be our result dot latitude, and then our longitude is going to be our result dot longitude, and then success, I'm going to set that to true if we are here, because we haven't returned here. So I'm just going to set this to true and tell it that we have got a successful response with something inside of it. And for our use effect dependencies, we're going to add data because we're using data within here. Sorry, because we're using data within here. And let's console log this just to see if we do get our coordinate state set properly. So let's test this out. Open up the console. And that's the initial state. So just going to put in LA, hit enter, and we're successfully getting our coordinates back. So that's a success there. So next what we want to do, if you remember, is we want to call our other endpoint, which will be our forecast endpoint, and we'll be sending these coordinates to that endpoint. So I'm just going to add another React query hook. On this one we want data, which we'll rename to weather. So I'm just going to destructure that and we want the status as well. And add our use query hook. So we want our query key, which will be weather, and then we're just going to pass in our coordinates. And then we're going to have our query function. And then we're going to pass in our object with our longitude and latitude. And then our next enabled, we're just going to say if we've got quad.success. So if our previous request was successful, then we want to enable this one and we want to use this next request. So next I'm just going to console log the weather just to see if we get back the weather data and the status just to see what the status is. So we go over to our application, refresh, hit enter a city, and as you can see we're getting back our data, but for some reason our API call doesn't seem to be working properly. The reason why it wasn't working properly, let's get back, HTML is just that this needs to be prefixed with HTTPS. HTTPS/. And then if we refresh, we see we're getting our data back. So we change cities. Yep, that works fine. One other thing we want to do as well is add one last use effect. Is add one more use effect, which will stop. Which will be if status is success. So if status is success, then what we're going to do is we're going to set quad. And what we're going to do is get the previous value, what was previously inside, copy that in, and we're just going to reset the success to false. And then going to add in status as our dependency. Okay, so now that we're getting our data back successfully, what we want to do is we want to sort out the data and format it to look a lot better than what it currently does. So if I just show you what the data looks at the moment, type in city. At the moment our data is not formatted in a really usable way. So if I just expand one, as you can see we get the 9th of April 6 PM and the 9th of April 9 PM, and then the next forecast is for midnight of the 10th of April. So what we want to do is we want to group these together, like the forecasts that are for the same day but different times. So these two would be grouped under the 9th of April as a key, and then we will have an array of each weather forecast for the different times. Okay, so now in order to implement this, we're just going to jump back into our code. So I'm going to add a new use effect. And then our dependency for this hook will be weather, because that's the state that we want to manipulate. So the first thing we're going to do is add a guard condition. So if you don't have the weather, then just return. Next, we want to make our data look a little bit more friendlier to use. So I'm just going to create a new const and call this days. What we're going to do is we're going to do weather.list, because if you look here, the weather comes in an object and the property list is where all the different forecasts exist. So I'm going to do a map on that array. I'm going to say data and then we're just going to map it to a new object. That's a lot friendlier to use. So we're going to have a date time for our forecast, and then we want to use date FNS to pass this. So if we go to date FNS documentation, we're just going to be installing this package. So just copy this down and install date FNS. So we're just going to use the parse ISO to pass this from a string into a date, because at the moment we're getting our dates back as a string. So I'm just going to do data dot, and then the property is dt underscore txt. And one other thing that you notice, so it has a space, so this space should be replaced by a T for it to be formatted correctly. So we're just going to do dot replace, and then the space, I'm just going to replace it with a capital T, and then we should get our date formatted correctly from there. Next, we want the temperature, which will just be, we'll use math.round to round it up, because at the moment for temperatures, if you notice, we're getting decimal point numbers, so we just want to round these up to the nearest whole number. So I'm just going to do math.round, and then I'm just going to say data dot main, and then get our temp property. And then next, what we want to do is we want to get the weather description. So we're just going to create a new object for this one and just call it weather. And then this is going to have an icon. So this will just be, so our main will be our icon and our description will be our description. So I'm going to do data dot weather, and then because this is in an array, it'll always be the first item of the array. So I'm just going to do index 0, and then I'm just going to do main, as that will be our icon, and then just add in our description as well. And that will be data dot weather, same thing, first item, and then I'll just be description. Copy this and paste it, and that will be enough. So now that we've got our data formatted in a much better, clearer format, next what we'll be doing is we will be sorting it into and grouping each forecast into the same date. So for example, like we spoke about earlier, these two will be grouped into the same date because it's the same date. The only difference is like the time. So in order to do that, what we're going to be doing is declare a new object. Just call this forecast. I'm just going to give it type any. Okay, and then next we're going to have our reduce function in order to group the same dates together under the same key. So the first argument of the reduce, the first callback argument will be the previous value, and the next one will be the current value or the cumulative value. So we're going to have an if statement, and we're going to use dateFNS, so we're going to say is same day. So this function will tell us if it is the same day, and then we're going to be able to group these together. I'm going to do a new date, then we're just going to pass in the previous date time. And then the next argument will be the current date time. So a new date, and then that'll just be current dot date time and then we're just going to destructure the date time from the current object. So date time give this a type, date time, this is just type date, and I'm just going to say current. And then next what we're going to do is we're going to create our date key. So in order to make this key a lot more readable, we're just going to make it the 4 year. So we're going to make it the 4 year and the month and the date. So just call this date key. I'm just going to say new date, and then I say date time dot get 4 year, and then next we're going to do date time dot get month, and then finally we're going to do date time dot get date. And in order to have this as a key, we need this to be a string, so I'm going to do to UTC string. And now that we've done all that formatting, we can do forecast. So we're going to do forecast.date key, and then now we're going to create our object using that forecast object. So we're going to be adding values to this object that's empty at the moment. So we're going to say forecast, and then we're going to add in date key. So now that we're assigning it here, and then we're seeing here, does this object exist? Does this property exist? So if it does exist, what we're going to do is we're going to copy in the previous whatever was inside it already. So we're going to do forecast, and then date key, because it already exists, and then we just want to append the new current value to it. And if it doesn't exist, we'll initialize it with the current value. Okay. And then finally, outside of our return statement, we want to return the current value. And we can now console log our forecast. So console.log forecast, and this should be much better to work with right now. So we type in LA. As you can see, all of our different dates have been all like put together in the same object with. Okay, now that we've grouped all our dates together into the same object with the key, the same date, what we want to do now is we want to create our types. So in our source directory, we're going to create a new folder, call this types, and I'm going to call this weather.types.ts. Okay, so the first type that we want to define is our forecast. So that will just be this new object that we've created here. So export interface forecast, and then that'll be date time, which will be of type date, and then temperature, which will be of type number, and then weather, which will be type icon, and I'll leave this one for now, and then description, which will just be of type string. So for icon, type icons is going to be a string type that looks like this. So I'm just going to say icons. And we need another type as well. Export interface. And the other one is going to be our city forecast. Going to be city, which is of type string, country, which is of type string as well, and then forecast, which will be our grouped forecast where it's grouped by date, is going to be of type. So the key is going to be date, which is going to be string. So because this date can be dynamic, and then that's going to be type forecast array like that, and the final type that we need is our display forecast. So export interface, and I'm going to call this display forecast. We're going to have city, type string, and then date, which is of type string as well, and then forecast, which is of type forecast, and then those should be all of our types. So now we can create our city forecast. And then this is just going to be of type city forecast. And then the first is going to be city, and that's just going to be weather dot city dot name, and then next is going to be country, which is of type weather dot city dot country, and then next forecast, which is going to be of type forecast, which is the forecast object that we created here. Okay, and then finally we want to create a new state for our forecast. I'm going to say const. I'm going to call this current forecast, and then set current forecast. Which is going to be use state. I'm going to give this a type of display forecast. Or undefined. And we're just going to set it down here at the end of this use effect. So set current forecast. I'm just going to set it to the city forecast. Actually, sorry. We also need another set state as well. Another state, so we're just going to have forecast, and we're going to have set forecast. So use state. I'm going to give this a type of either city forecast or undefined, because we're not setting it an initial value. I'm just going to say set forecast, and I'm just going to give this to our city forecast, like that. Okay, now that we've done all of this work up front of shaping our data and formatting it, it makes building our components much easier. So in our components folder, what we're going to do is we're going to create our weather component. Call this weather.tsx, and then so our weather component is going to have two props, which is weather and forecast. And then props, and I'm just going to define props up here. Type props. That's going to be of type city forecast, and then the next one is going to be forecast, which is going to be the event I'm going to be passing off. So that's going to be forecast, and that's going to be passed up as display forecast. That's just going to return void. Okay, now that we've got that, what we're going to do is we're going to create our markup. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a class name to our parent div, and then give this a shadow and make it rounded, and then give it a padding of 8, and then a max width of a medium. Next, we're going to add a flex container. Flex, and then flex call, so we can make it into a column, and then do items.start. Next, we're going to have our h1, which is going to display our city. So what we're going to do is text medium. So I say weather dot city. Nice, we're getting autocomplete TypeScript. And then font semi-bold and text gray. Actually no, sorry. Just leave it as semi-bold. And then next we're going to have a span underneath that. And that span is going to contain our weather country, which I think we should have that. So class name, we're going to give it smaller text. So this one needs to be text to Excel. Text medium, font semi-bold, and text gray 600. Next, we want to display all of our different days that we've grouped our forecast into. So I'm just going to add a unordered list and give that a class name of flex call item start, padding top and bottom of 6, and then we'll have our JSX, and then in here I'm going to do object keys, and for that we're just going to do weather forecast, so we get all of our date keys out there, and then we're just going to map them. And I'm going to get date out of that and use the index as the key. List item, and the key for that will be the index, and then in here we're going to have a button, and then that will show our formatted date. So I'll just format using data finesse and do new date gonna say date, and then we just want the day of the week, which will be EE. And then class name, we'll have cursor pointer. And then text, blue 900. And then a hover text, blue 600. And then margin bottom 2, and then hover underline. And I'm going to add our on-click listing as well. And then that should call our function show forecast. Just going to declare that up here, show forecast. Just going to take the date, type string, forecast is going to be the prop that we're passing up, and then we're going to have city, and then weather dot city, and then date, the date like that, and then forecast is going to be weather dot forecast, and then we're going to access that using the key date. Just pass that off. And then have the show forecast pass off our date. Save that. And then in order to use our function, our component, we need to add it to our app.tsx. I'm just going to import it here using autocomplete. And this component takes a few parameters, like forecast, and we're just going to set that to set current forecast, which is the setter that we created before, and then the weather, which is going to pass in the weather, which is going to be the forecast. So it's saying it's not assignable to type undefined. So to prevent this TypeScript error that you might get, we're just going to do forecast, and if you have a forecast, display that. Just save that, and then let's test this out. LA, and voila, what do you know? We get our days of the week back. Okay, so now that we've done this bit, what we want to do is we want to create the component for displaying each of these individual forecasts in these arrays. So to do that, if we go back to our code, we're going to create a new component, and we're going to call this one forecast. Actually, we already have something called forecast, so we're just going to rename this to weekly forecast, otherwise we're going to get a namespace error. So this will take in a prop, which is forecast, and then just going to do our props type above this. Going to do forecast, and then that's going to be equal to display forecast. So we're going to have our first div, and then that div is going to have a class, and it's going to have a flex container, flex call, and then item start. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have the city, so forecast dot city, and then make this nice and large text. 3XL, and then font bold, and then we're going to show the date at the top as well. So we're going to do text, medium, font semi-bold, and then we're going to do text gray 600. I'm going to do format new date, and I'm going to do forecast dot date. I'm just going to do for ease, import our format date, import that there, and save. And then I'm just going to add this stuff to TSX just to show you what we're working with at the moment. So we have our current forecast and show this weekly forecast component. And prop did it take it to get forecast, so just do forecast, and that's going to be current forecast. Save that. So as you can see, we're displaying the city and the date and the day. So next, what we want to do is to actually display our forecast. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to loop through the forecast. I'm going to say map, and then in our callback, the first argument we're going to get is the weather. First parameter, sorry, is going to be the weather, and then the index. And then we're going to have a div. And that div is going to have key of the index. And then within that, we're going to have another div. And then that div is going to display a paragraph with the time. So what we're going to do is we're going to do format. We're going to do weather dot date time, and then we just want the time. I'm just going to give this a class name of text small. And then next we want the actual forecast. So for this one we're going to have a flex container. We're going to have another div. And then that div is going to have another flex container inside of it. And that's going to contain a paragraph, p tag, with the temperature, so weather dot temp, and then because we want it in degrees Celsius, we're going to add in the encoder for that, which is going to be ampersand degree and then semicolon deg semicolon, and then just going to add in some class names to this, style it a bit. I'm going to say to Excel, and then font semi-bold, and our top flex container we want it to justify between and content center. Okay, so I'll quickly show you what that looks like now. As you can see, we're getting the time and the temperature. So we also want to add like an icon as well for the weather. So just finish off our styling. So content center, padding left and right, we want 6. And then padding top and bottom, we want 4 pixels. And we want a border which is solid, and border which is 2 pixels, and then border which is slate 300, and then of this be rounded, and then I want a margin top and bottom of 2, and then within this other flex container we just want to center the temperature. So we look at this, this looks much better now. And on the other side here, we want the icons. I'm going to show you how we do that in a minute. Okay, so now we're going to be creating our weather icons component to just render out our different icons. So I've gotten these icons from this website. It has free animated SVG icons, and I'm just going to link this in the description. So So all I've gone and done is I've added these to my assets folder. I'm just going to create a new folder called icons, and I'm just going to save each one. Okay, so if you just scroll down, you can download the icons. So I'm just going to paste in the icons because I've already done that. So next we're just going to create our component to render out these weather icons. So for this component, I'm just going to call it weather icons. And create our component. And then this will take in a prop, which is weather. And then I'm just going to define the prop type here because it's a very simple one. And then it's just going to be icons. And then it's just going to be the icons type that we have here. And then what we want to do is we want to render our icons. So we're just going to say if the word icon is rain, then get our rainy icon, our rainy SVG. I'm just giving them a width as well. And just make sure that you import each of these. And then for the other ones, I used React icons. So React icons is pretty famous. And I'm just going to install that. And then just going to allow me to import these. And save. And then now we can use our weather icons inside of our forecast component. So I'm just going to import our weather icons, and I'm just going to pass in weather. Weather dot and then icons. And then you save that, go back to application, add in a city, LA, and now look, you get your weather icons and the application is looking much better. So I'm just going to add some more styling to and sort the layout for the app component. So I'm just going to add a div and then class, margin top bottom, 10 pixels, and then add another div, and then this div is going to have a full width of 100%. It's going to be a flex container, flex call, and in screen size is bigger than medium. It's going to be flex row, so it's responsive. And then it's going to have a div which is going to be flex basis of 1/3. Actually, no, sorry, 3/12. And then we're just going to cut and paste the forecast into there. And then the next one, just going to have a class name, and then I'm just going to have a flex basis of 912, and then padding right and left of 6, and then I'm just going to cut and paste the weekly forecast into there. And as you can see, our application is looking much better, and we have our icons, and if you type in a different city, say Leeds, you can see our application is working just as expected. And type in Miami, and then select different day. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and if you stay till this far, please hit like and subscribe for more. Thank you. Peace out.